I'm Jenny Klochko, and you're watching my podcast, the platform for guests to stories beyond your daily newsfeed. Today, I have a very special episode. Probably they will be favorite for spiritual people, for skeptics, and also for the conspiracy theory lovers. So I'm waiting for all of you letting me know your opinions, thoughts in the comments below after this. Today, I would like we discuss and explore the surprising tools for the defense, for the intelligence, and how successful they prove to be. Because American government spent over 40 years money on these programs, and the last one was called Stargate, and it was declassified in 1995. So my guest today, Angela Ford, she was part of this program, and previously she worked for FBI and intelligence agency. So she has an extensive experience working for the defense. So let's see how we can refer to the past and prove program, successful program, getting intelligence about the Soviets and Russians. And for the current conflict, the Russian aggression in Ukraine, I'll tell you even more. The American program was so successful that Soviets started panicking at the end of 80s, and they started own program of the psychics and remote viewers, which proved to be successful as they claim, and they give lots of examples. And eventually they closed the program in 2012. But anyway, let's discuss the surprising tool with Angela Ford. Angela, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for finding time talking to me today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Angela,
Thank you.
how do you feel about all those years and using this surprising and unexpected tools for the defense and for intelligence? How does it make you feel now?
Really, throughout all my years, but especially the psychic, because it was a very different way of collecting intelligence and having the work, go to analysts and being acted upon. It was exciting. I couldn't ask for anything more in an intelligence operational environment. So that was good. That was good. It was tiring. At times it exhausted me. It was nerve-wracking, especially whenever you're predicting the future and you don't know if you're right or wrong. And sometimes it took a long time to get your feedback to find out if what you said was correct or not. So it was emotional. It was um it was emotional. It was up and down, but I just stayed with it because I guess I wanted to. Um, I just guess I just wanted, I guess I wanted to be there, and and I knew that it was very different. But not only did I work in the intelligence capacity, the Defense Intelligence Agency, who I worked for, they were not only looking at research into this whole psychic phenomenon, and they gave Stanford Research Institute, SRI, money for research. They gave research money to Princeton, to Duke University in North Carolina. So there was more than just psychics working. There was investigation into how does the mind work, why are some people better at this than others. And I think I was there for that reason too. I wanted to explore. I just wanted information, like why am I acting the way, why can I do this, to the ability that I can do it. I could find people, I could find things. So it was just more than doing an operation in remote viewing. There was a lot more to it. And it was interesting. Other countries were doing it. We had a strong foreign, they called it a foreign assessment. What are other countries doing in this realm? I mean, we were hearing stories about the Soviet Union. We were getting Russian scientific magazines that we had interpreters interpret from Russian to English. So it was just more than um, it was just more than remote viewers op, you know, remote going on. And that was very appealing. It was very interesting.
Russians, they
They're
claim.
not only the Soviet Union, but
Sorry. Carry on. I'll
go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. Carry on, please, please.
Oh no, there were other countries. There were other countries that you not only had the Soviet Union, you had Brazil, South America. There were other people. There were other China. China was big into it. So it was interesting. It was an interesting time. It was a very interesting time because there were resources that were allocated by the US Congress and by the government for us to do what we did. So it was probably it was a lot, it was a rather large effort to go out and see what's there and what and how and to give us operations. Some people think maybe a program still exists. I don't know. Personally, I don't think so, but even if one did, it didn't have the emphasis that my program, that the program I belong to had.
Do you think it would be useful to have similar program right now when everyone talks about the change of the world order?
Oh, sure. If you could access and describe people and intentions, sure, sure. Well, when you say the change of the world order, what do you mean by that?
Well, as far as I can understand, is the change in the main players and the borders of the countries change and the powers. So it feels like Putin wants to have more power for more influence, and obviously there's China and US, and so it feels like it's something new is coming, but who's gonna win and how this power is gonna be balanced in the world? That's a question.
Yeah, I mean, I could imagine that you could ask a remote viewer that. I mean, they would more or less have to, if you have major players, individuals, you could access, more or less try to find out their plans and intentions, or just have someone remote view the future and just say, what's it going to look like in, 10 years from now or 5 years from now? Sure.
Is it changing the future? Or it's all sort of like set up for us to go through it?
I feel that can be changed if people would change.
Hmm.
A lot of war. I mean, that's just male ego and that I don't know. I think it's silly war.
Russians claimed that Americans they didn't find the method to train somebody from the scratch. They were employing people already with a gift who were doing in their own way, while the Russians they claim they sort of employed find the officers, people who were already sort of like in military mindset, and they had the method when they could train anybody to read, to perceive, to predict, and be effective on this program. Would you agree on that?
The United States psychic program run by the military felt that they could bring anybody in and train them. And you can up to a certain point. Um, the problem was the people that were really good that could go beyond accessing and describing something, that could maybe locate something or tell you or access and describe people. The natural psychics could go beyond the training. And that was a major contention because the Army military, US military, they love to train. They're really big into training. And so they received a manual from Stanford Research Institute that was written by Ingo Swann, who was a psychic that worked there. And he put a manual together called Coordinate Remote Viewing, which was used by high officials. They would give it to Congress to read because it was more mechanical from Congress. That manual was easier than it had to, it was better to sell a program like I had with maybe technical information more than saying psychic or it was just because a lot of times when our people went to Congress to get money to get funding for the program, they were laughed at. So our government hired Stanford Research to come up with something to show it more in a scientific light so that they wouldn't be laughed at. Plus, they wanted money they wanted money from Congress for the research and to pay us. And so Stanford Research Institute came up with a manual called Coordinate Remote Viewing. Now, the military in our office took that manual they made it their training manual. Well, so the military felt they had a training manual. They could bring anybody in and train them. And that's what they did. Organize the job. You just couldn't pick up anybody from anywhere. You had to you had to have clearances. And if you didn't have clearances, you had to receive clearances to be here. It was a lot easier just for people to pick up people that already had the clearances. We did nothing. My office did nothing to go outside to find out who's doing what, who's the real deal. They were just bringing in people who thought could be remote viewers, and they would give them a personality test and say, "Oh, well, I think you can do this." So that wasn't good. And I can remember Congress in higher people in higher levels of bureaucracy in Congress said, they said, why don't you just hire somebody that is a natural at this? And they gave the example. They said, if I had cancer, I wouldn't just go to any cancer doctor. I would find out who's the best cancer doctor out there to help me. So it was a dividing factor. It was a very divide, and it was probably one of the reasons why the program was shut down in 1995.
Do you know, I was surprised when I was preparing for our interviews and I was reading this book, ESP Wars East and West, about American program and Russian participants. And I was surprised because there are documents printed here, declassified about the location of the Soviet submarines. So these are the things. And it's something so tangible. And for me, as a journalist, as a just human, it was two things which I found extra sensory perception is very spiritual thing, and the so detailed description of the location of the submarines and everything that comes with it, it was quite shocking, how effective it can be. I mean, it's there's one thing when extrasensory perception part of the culture and beliefs and religious thing, and you take it as a that aspect, but becoming as a powerful tool for the defense, and so powerful proving with things like that, it's shocking, isn't it? And as ESP, they were sort of covering, ESP was, or extrasensory perception, they were covering, from what I found out, three aspects. It's telepathy and real information perception and precognition, awareness of the information from the future. Is it everyone was covered in three aspects, or there were people who were doing one of those things? How it would be
Okay,
working?
now the US government felt that they could train people. They really weren't looking for people with the natural gift. I don't know how the Soviets got, I don't know. I don't know how the Soviets got their psychics. I don't know how they got their psychics. However, I do know that the Soviet culture and the government, this or rooted it was deeply rooted in the ex-Soviet Union's culture. So for the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, to use psychic, it was more natural for them to do that than it was for the United States. They didn't have to explain to their government, they didn't have to beg for the money, or it was more widely accepted. Now, because of the shamanism and their belief, when they trained their psychics, they actually trained their psychics to channel, which is more of a spiritual way of receiving information. The Soviets found their have such a difficult time explaining this to get to find the resources to have it. Now, the United States, our charter, we were only hired to remote view because back in the 1960s and the 1950s, the CIA had a program and they were doing mind control on people because they were trying to find out if people were psychic, but they were giving them LSD. They were trying to find out if they were giving them drugs to see if it enhanced psychic ability. So they were manipulating a person's mind. Well, I think two people died because of it. So Congress came in and said, you're going to stop. They told CIA, you're going to close down that program. No more mind control. Now, now in the early 1970s, our government's starting to hear, well, the Soviets are doing this and they're doing it operationally. So our people approached Congress and said, and I think in 1976, there was a downed airplane that a remote viewer was able to find. So Congress sort of came around, I think in 1970, they came around, our Congress came around in the early 1970s and said, okay, we're going to give you a program. However, you are only going to remote view. You better not do anything that will affect there's no mind control at all. So we were only hired to remote view. So as far as telepathy, the mind move, that was out the window. That was out of the window. The only thing we could do was the only thing we were allowed to do was remote view. Now, and that we had lawyers at the Pentagon and officials at the Pentagon that had rules, and we were under human use, meaning that they could not manipulate our minds. And they had to be very careful when the scientists wanted to have experience, they wanted to work with us and have experiments with us. They could not control the mind. So that was the United States. Now, the Soviet Union, they didn't have that problem. So they were into remote viewing, they were into psychokinesis, PK, into the movement of objects. They were into everything. But I know that the time that I was involved, we were just strictly remote viewing.
When I was reading this book, and this book is written, I've just explained, by the American and Russian authors, and those who were actively participation in the program. And General Savin, the general of KGB, he was sort of like the head of all of this, and he is still vocal about it. And he was explaining that when they started
Like,
only developing the program, they sort of first they proved being effective with the criminal police, because in the 90s Moscow was sort of like full of this criminal wars, and they gave help with that. And also the next step was Balkan War, and they were helping with the pilots, and they were saying when the NATO fighter jets is gonna bomb, when they're gonna fly. And as he says, they also took down a few fighter jets during that time. And the other thing which refers to the intelligence, their specialists or their experts were able to identify French spies in Moscow in the 1996. I think there was this big scandal with French intelligence. So step by step they were using it, but also as sort of the new Russia was evolving, this focus was away from defense into the personalities and the known fact. You mentioned shamanism, that Putin is a big believer of the shamans, and he was going to have this blood baths and consultation with shamans. Do you think it's something could be effective for the political leaders, not just in Russia? I mean, I know in the US they didn't use it, but do you think for those purposes, especially for the during political consultations or meetings or negotiations, it can be useful to have people like you in the team to guide or to give some sort of tips or to warn your leader?
Of course it would help to have somebody with you to say, don't get on that airplane, it's going to crash. Of course. Of course.
With the situation where we're recording this interview, we were told that Trump and Putin are going to meet in Alaska. So, if you were on Trump team, what would you be able to help him with, especially before this coming meeting with Putin, who is not an easy person to talk to, and the subject is quite complex, peace in Ukraine?
I don't know. I don't know what I would say. I mean, I don't know what I would say. I would have to I I would have to access and describe Putin. I would have to say, what are his motives? Is he sincere? I I wouldn't worry about Trump. I would access and describe Putin. I would say, is he going into the meeting sincere? Does he really want to stop the war? Is he sincere about all of this, stopping the war and stopping the killing? That's the first thing I would access and describe. Or I would say, is he going to go in and try to get something out of Trump that, is he going to try to there would think, I mean, what are Putin's intentions? Is he going in with a good heart? Is he going in to be manipulative? I would ask, what does he really want out of this? What does he hoping to gain from this? What does he really want? What would he do if he didn't get what he wanted? That kind of stuff.
Um, there's a lot of in media speculation about
That's what I would do.
uh, lots of speculation about his health. That he has some severe cancer and is going on and off for the past 3 years. Have you tried to see if that's true or it's more part of the informational warfare?
I don't know. It's hard because if he's sick, if Putin is really that sick, he's going to want to hide it. Okay, he's going to want to hide it, and it's going to be a very private thing to him. If someone is very private, it's hard for a psychic to access that. So if he is sick, is he wants to hide that. He doesn't want the world to know that. So that would be very difficult to act. If somebody's private or somebody doesn't want you to know something, that's going to be that's hard to access.
But
I don't know.
okay, let's go to technicalities, how you make things to be known. Because when I was preparing for our conversation, and there were a few cases that became, I understand a lot of information classified, and probably will be if it's classified sometime in the future. But there are cases when you were very helpful and effective with the search of people. And could you tell more about that? And how certain and what tools did you use? Did you meditate? Did you had sort of like how it happens? Let's explain our viewers who is not familiar with this aspect of getting information.
Well, when I worked finding people and things, I worked a method, it was called automatic writing, and it was like channeling. And so you can receive information almost like you're in a semi-trance, and the information will come through in writing. And that's how I received a lot of information. Now, if I was accessing and describing just like a building or what goes inside a building, I would use a different methodology where I can bring up images, which would be more visual. So, depending on what the question was, that would, if somebody wanted specific information, personalities, I would do the automatic writing. If it was just a matter of accessing and describing a building and what's going on inside, or going to a location and finding out what's going on, I would do more like the meditative technique, where I could come out and draw pictures and write a report. So again, it depends on what the operation, what the target was.
Could you tell about the successful operation you helped to find the fugitive who was, you were very specific with the place, location, even when you didn't feel like you were certain.
Well, there was a man by the name of Charles Jordan, and this was an unclassified case because Charles Jordan was on the 10 most wanted list. And he worked for Customs, and Customs is a drug agency. It helped in drug interdiction. And the he was on the 10 most wanted list, and there was a TV program we had at the time. It was called the 10 Most Wanted. And so Customs, they contacted the man I worked for, Dr. Verona at the Defense Intelligence Agency, and said, "We're looking for Charles Jordan." Apparently, Charles Jordan was a customs agent. He took drug money. He took drug money. Took a lot of money instead of like, and he just took money. They don't like it when one of their own get dirty. So customs really wanted him. So they were having a hard time locating him, and they said, "Do you think your people could help?" So we said, "Well," and so they said, "Well, we'll try." So they asked me. I went into session with my boss and the secretary, and they asked me where was Charles Jordan. So I did automatic writing, and I said that Charles Jordan was in Lowell. I said Lowell, Lowell, Wyoming. Now, my boss said, "Are you sure you don't mean Lowell, Massachusetts?" Because he was born in Lowell, Massachusetts. And I said, "No." I said, "I'm getting that feeling of cowboys and Indians in the Wild West." And I said, "No, Wyoming." And the secretary said, "Well, she said Wyoming. She said Wyoming." So there was a book that we used to use, maps. There was a book of maps. My boss picked up a book of maps and he went to Wyoming and he said there's EELL. Well, the session kind of went fast, and I think he probably wanted more information from me. But after I gave the location, I was getting the feeling of drugs and I was getting the feeling of warm weather. I was getting the feeling of the Caribbean. I was picking up this whole drug scene, how it was a whole different environment. I mean, that's a whole different feeling than one of cowboys and Indians in Wyoming. I was picking up another scenario, but I didn't know who Charles Jordan was. I did not know he was wanted for drugs. I didn't know anything. So at that point, I said, I want to quit the session because I'm getting something else totally different. And I didn't want to change my mind. So I wanted to leave. I wanted to leave. So it was a quick session. And it's hard. I mean, if you're in the government and somebody's asking you something for information and you give them two words, Level Wyoming, they really don't like that. They want to report, but that's all I could give them was Level Wyoming. So Dr. Verona went to Customs and other people that worked the issue. They had the man in Florida, the Caribbean, um, and Dr. Verona said, "Well, we have one person and that's good." And they're saying Wyoming. And Customs like, "No way, no, he wouldn't be in Wyoming. He wants warm weather." So they didn't believe he was in Wyoming. Well, I think my bosses wanted me to work the case again, but I didn't want to because I felt like where I said I just didn't want to work it again. Well, here, one of my bosses came down from Washington, D.C. to where I was working in Fort Meade, and I figured that since he was there, maybe I would give it another chance. So I went back in and I worked the case, and I said something to the effect that, if you want Charles Jordan, he's moving west of Lovell, Wyoming. And I said there was a hotel, and I described an Indian burial ground. So they were excited about that because I gave them a little bit more information, something they could make a report out of. Well, then they went to Customs, and they said, "Well, our person's still saying it's that they said something like, well, he's moving now, or if you want him, he's not in level, he's moving." And the customs agent said to my boss, he said, "As we are speaking, Charles Jordan is being apprehended 100 miles west of Level, Wyoming." And then, they were able, I guess the hotel where they The hotel was there, the Indian burial ground. So we were happy, and I thought that we supplied the information. And and they said no, there was a security guard that worked at Yellowstone National Park. He was the one that spotted Charles Jordan and he called it in. So we were happy that I was able to, do this. It was very uplifting for the office, but I was disappointed that I would that we didn't get credit for it. So this was in 1988 or 1989. Now, this was an unclassified case. So in 1991, 1992, the BBC got a hold of the case and they found out that a psychic solved it. So they came from England over here where I live in Maryland, and they visited my boss and I. And my boss at the time only lived about 15 minutes from me. So they were curious about the case. And then a year later, they came back and they did a reenactment of the case for the Discovery Channel, which was shown June 1995. So so they came back, they did a reenactment. So the customs guy was there, and my boss said, "Boy, it's a shame we never got any credit for finding him." And the customs man looked and said, "Are you kidding?" They said it was because of her we found him. They said they never believed he would have been in Wyoming. About 3 weeks after I said he was in Wyoming, Charles Jordan sent a picture of himself to his mother to show that he was alive and well. And in the picture, I think there was a truck that they said that had Wyoming license plates. And they said as soon as they saw that, they knew I was right when I said Lovell, Wyoming. So they started to send up. They started sending pictures up of Charles Jordan into that whole western area. And that's why I think, and they said that's why they got him, is because they were just oversaturating the area. And they said, no, it was because of me. So there, I found that out years later. But that's how intelligence works, I guess, or the psychic world, but that's how it works.
So being uncertain and unsure is part of the game. You
So
just
that
have to
was
accept it.
it's we're getting the information, I guess, from the ethers. So the information's out there, it's coming to me in my mind. There's distortion there, so you're not going to be 100% right, but you hope that you can at least make an effect somehow, or make a good change. That's the most you can hope for.
There was another case known to the public about you were helpful with the search, and this book, it was someone's daughter close to President Clinton, sort of family, and when he was in the White House. Would you say the Clintons, they are spiritual, or they believe in this extra sensory perception, or they can rely on it?
Well, we did it for a friend of mine who worked at the White House, and um, I think President Carter knew we did it. President Carter acted on our information. The first George Bush acted on our information. I'm sure that, I mean, we did the operation. It didn't bother Clinton, but I don't know. I don't know because I never heard anything of what he thought. I mean, we knew that President Carter, we knew that he acted on our information. We knew that the first President Bush did. Um, but I know when we did this, Clinton probably knew. I'm sure I knew he knew because he knew how upset the woman was about her daughter. But I don't know what he said. I never heard anything of what he said, so I don't know. I don't know.
Angela,
I don't know. I never heard of
I know it's going to be tricky for
this.
you to say, but as a journalist, I can't resist and not to ask you about it. President Trump is promising to end the war. That's his intention, that's his declaration and promises during election campaign. Do you think, as a psychic, do you have any sensation or any information that this intention will be successful of his? Will Trump end the war?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I hope so, but I don't know. It may go on longer than what he would like. I just don't know. It's just a mess. I mean, to me, the whole thing is just, to me, the whole thing is just a mess. But I don't know. It's, I don't know. It's very hard to answer that because I know what you're asking me to look at. If it was in the blind and I didn't know, maybe, and you ask it in a different way, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I just don't know. I don't, but I'm not being psychic because I can't be. Because you're asked, I'm not being psychic now
Okay.
because I can't be. I'm not in psychic mode, but I mean, I hope he does. I hope something good comes from it, but I don't know. I don't know.
If we had a session, if we had a written session for the purpose of this podcast, would we be able to say what happens to Putin or how long he's gonna get? No?
No, you would put something in an envelope. You would ask me something like, look into the future and see what we're looking at something maybe a year, 6 months from now in a certain area. Can you tell me what's going on? Don't even mention the area. And then, you go down and while I'm looking at this area, hopefully, is there a war? Is there peace? Are there are there other things would come in like leaders or whatever? It's like when you give a psychic a task, they don't need you can't give them the information because it's called you're feeding them, you're giving them information. Now what happens is instead of answering as a psychic, I'm using my normal mind and I'm analyzing the situation. And that's what you don't want the psychic. You don't want the psychic to analyze. You just want the pure, better not to tell a psychic anything. Now, you can have in the envelope like a map of the Ukraine and Russia, and you can have pictures of Putin and Trump in the envelope, and you seal up the envelope and you tell the psychic, tell me about the activity in this envelope. So the psychic has a point of the psychic will concentrate on that. You can call that tasking number one. You can call that tasking A. You can call it whatever you want, but it gives the psychic something to focus on. And
Interesting.
you can't give the psychic you can't front load, you know, because it would say because then you're giving information to the psychic that they either end up guessing or they know the answer to, and it's not you're not performing as a psychic.
Hmm.
That makes sense.
Absolutely. So you as a psychic, you went to Russia in early 2000 to meet your colleagues who were working on this program in KGB. So what was your feelings and what sort of like your expectations and how did it feel talking to these people when you were sort of like in um, working against each other?
um, our scientists that we had on contract that did not work for the government, but they worked in parapsychology. They asked our agency to pay for them to go to Moscow because our one scientist, Dr. May, wanted to meet the ex-Soviet parapsychology researchers. And he said, this is the most open the country is going to be. He wanted to get up in there and he wanted to find out who was doing what. So he went. And in 1991, he started to go and he made, I don't know how many trips, but he went from 1999 to 2015. During that time, he met with scientists he met with scientists, and then they must have liked him or they trusted him because there was a second trip where he actually met General Savin, and General Savin was the man ahead of the Soviet psychics. So when he met General Savin, then Savin introduced him to the Soviet psychics, and that's where Dr. May, that's who he really wanted to meet, but he had to bide his time until they could trust him. Now, this was going on from 1991, 1995. This was going on. Now this and Now another thing that happened, and this was prior to 1991. It was at the time whenever Gorbachev was allowing, the Eastern communist countries, the Eastern Bloc, economically they were not strong, and people were starving. So Gorbachev knew he had to open up to the West. It wasn't because of ideology, it was because people needed help economically. So Gorbachev allowed a lot of Israelis or Jewish people to go back to their home country if they wanted to. Now, this would have been before 1991. Well, our agency, and our people who was working on foreign assessment, and our analysts, they found that there was a woman named Larissa that worked for the Soviet psychic program as a researcher. She was a scientist, but she left and she went to Israel. So we contacted her in Israel and we brought her to the United States so that we could ask her, like, what did you do when you were working as a parapsychologist for the Russians? So we vetted her. So we took her out of Israel, we brought her here, and then she ended up staying in the United States and working for Dr. May. So it was through Larissa that Dr. May was even getting more information about what the Soviets were doing. They were working together. He was making trips to Russia. And then Larissa had a friend named Victor, and Victor wanted to come to the United States. So she took him out of the Ukraine, and so he came into the United States. So Dr. May was able to work with Larissa and Victor. So he was gathering a lot of information. He was making these trips, and because of Victor and Larissa, they trusted Ed. So everybody became friends. So then our program ended in 1995. The information became disclassified. And so there were books that were written, and that's how ESP Wars came about. There was the Soviet side, they told their story, and there was the US side, and we told our story. And the book was published, I think, in 2015, and we received I received an email, and that we were invited, Dr. May and I and Joe McMonagle were invited to Russia, Moscow, in December 2015 for a reception that was being held by an official government newspaper in honor of this book, ESP War. So we went. And it was just a trip of a lifetime. And I couldn't believe Moscow is just, I mean, it was the best place I've ever traveled to. I mean, it was beautiful being on Red Square every day. It was beautiful. And we went to the oh, it was just beautiful. And we were there at Christmas time, and they celebrated Christmas in the biggest way possible. I mean, I swear they had Christmas trees that reached to the sky. It was just a trip of a lifetime. But I did find that the Russian people were wonderful people. They were funny, smart, and they were just like us. And um, you know, they and we just enjoyed each other's company. And we laughed. I mean, we said that, we saw that submarine that you had, and they said what they spied on us, and it was just wonderful.
How does
I met a general he was second in charge of the KGB. He was trying to make psychic weaponry. There was a psychiatrist who invited us to he was teaching at the University of Moscow. He invited us to his classroom, and he was a general during Gorbachev and Yeltsin's day, and he taught people PK. And I went back into the labs where they taught people how to move objects. It was just and then I remember being in these offices and I would look at pictures on the wall, and they were pictures of the people that we were spying on. It was like I remembered these pictures because I remembered the pictures from working in intelligence. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that guy. It was like there were pictures of people that is in intelligence. I would see these pictures because those were the people we were interested in spying on. So it was just interesting, but I liked it. And the food they had the best. They had this wine from Georgia, and it was the best wine I ever had. I mean, and I'm Italian, I should know why, but it was wonderful.
Angela, but how does it make you feel knowing that Russia does these atrocities in Ukraine right now? And, it's not just Putin's war, is it? I mean, Russians going there to make money, killing Ukrainians, and it happens on daily basis. And having, that wonderful experience you had, and now it's like this
Well, I
ugly
think it's
reality.
yeah. Well, yes, I know, because going over there in 2015, Trump was not in power, but Putin was. And I remembered the people that we talked to, the Russians that we talked to, they didn't like Putin. They said he was he was he was an intelligence officer. They did not like him as president. They didn't like him. The people and these were the people that worked and protected Gorbachev and Yeltsin back in the 1980s. But these people, they didn't like Putin, and I think it's terrible. I don't blame the Russian people. I blame Putin for doing what he's doing.
Angela, there's on this podcast there was a commander of the secret group 13, and his call sign is 13, and he is serving with Ukraine's defense intelligence. And what they do miraculous things. They sort of created, developed this sea drone, and they destroying Russian warships in the Black Sea, and they proved being super successful. And I know the sort of like the dream of this commander to destroy at least one um, submarine of Russian fleet. If you were part of that team with your talent, with your expertise and your extrasensory perception, would you be able to help him identify and maybe develop this information how to destroy Russian submarine?
I think so. You mean I think so? You sure?
So would you, for that kind of thing, would you need to be close to the geographically area, or geography doesn't matter? You just need specific sort of question, and you would be able to.
No, no, I think again, it's like put the question in an envelope. You may say this is technical information we're looking for, but it's if you want the right answer, it's how you ask it. You can't leave the psychic the information before he answers the question.
How tricky. I thought the hardest part is to do the reading, not actually the asking the questions and talking to you. I understand that asking the question is the key to the successful answer, isn't it?
Well, it's the focus. It gives you the focus. You put the question in an envelope. That's the focus. That's the focus. That's what you want the focus. That's the focus. That's the intention. You can be all over the place.
Interesting. Angela, if you were part of the Zelensky team in this difficult time for him, so is there as a psychic, as a remote viewer, is there something you would tell him or you would assist him, and what it would be?
I don't know. I mean, maybe I could, if I had information on maybe how to protect his soldiers or his people so they wouldn't be killed anymore, so there'd be no more killings. Um, try to assist in that way. Maybe give him some more something out, maybe give him another strategic plan that may work that he hasn't tried, or maybe he doesn't. I mean, there would be things, something like that. Try to give him information, or try to find out, like, what are you planning on doing? Is that going to work? You know, I don't know. I mean, it's a difficult situation, the Ukraine and Russia. It's very, very difficult. And it's just, I feel so bad about everybody dying. And it's just sad. But I do think it will end soon. I do think it will end soon. That's my gut. That's a hunch I have. So maybe Trump will stop it. Maybe there will be negotiations.
The question I ask all my guests, and I guess it's difficult for me to ask and for you to answer, but let's sort of like try to rephrase it. Usually I ask my guests, why do you like Ukraine? Because usually it's people either from Ukraine or being affiliated with Ukraine. You haven't been in Ukraine yet, but let's rephrase it specifically for you. So far, because of the full-scale invasion and everything, the information, what do you think? And maybe there are things you like about Ukraine, or maybe something you you would like to discover, or you would like to know more about Ukraine. Is there sort of like, what's your feelings and thoughts about Ukraine?
I do know that the Ukrainian people make very good food because I've been to people and I love the food. And I like the culture. I do. I like that. I like the culture. I like the food, and I love Zelensky. I think he's wonderful. I really like Zelensky, and I feel that I feel bad what's happening there. I feel terrible what's happening there.
Yeah.
And I wrote a book with Victor Rubel. He's Ukrainian. Him and I wrote a psychic thriller novel that we're getting edited now that we want to come out. Hopefully, we'll get it published.
Oh, exciting. We definitely should do another interview about your book to promote it and support and for people to buy it, because I'm sure it should be something very interesting to read. Thank you very much, Angela. Thank you. I'm so
Mhm.
grateful.
Oh, I'm grateful. Thank you. Thank you.
There was Angela Ford with her extrasensory perception and your experience and expertise on spying on Soviets and Russians with your very untraditional and surprising tools. So please let me know what you think. And are you excited? Have you ever had the reading, or maybe you feel you have the talent yourself and you do it through your sort of tools and modes and meditations, or as Angela automatic writing? Please share your thoughts. I'm excited already to read it. And if you ask me, what do I think about this extra perception? Was born in a culture which is very welcome to all of that. As a educated and as a journalist, I'm careful, but everything was coming in. But this book, ESP Wars, East and West, quite fascinating read. Please do. And also, I believe that not everything in the world you can explain with a formula. Thank you for watching. Please like or dislike if you did enjoy. Share and subscribe. Please, please, please do subscribe, and it helps a lot to support this my podcast, and hopefully our community will grow. And thank you for watching.